There comes a moment in the life of an empath when their quiet suffering transforms into something extraordinary, something powerful, something that Carl Jung would describe as the integration of the shadow. For most of their life, the empath has been the soft place where others collapse, the warm presence that absorbs the storms of the world, the silent healer who carries emotional burdens that were never their own. They have been misunderstood, underestimated, and often exploited because their kindness was mistaken for weakness. Yet beneath the surface of every empath, there is a stage of evolution so profound, so intense, and so transformative that those who once used them begin to fear the very force they helped create. This is the final stage of the empath, the stage Jung would call dangerous, not because the empath becomes harmful, but because they finally become whole. An empath's journey begins with innocence. They feel everything, the unspoken words, the hidden wounds, the silent heartbreak sitting behind someone's smile. They walk through life like open windows, allowing every emotion, every intention, and every vibration to flow through them. And because the world is not gentle, this openness often leads them into situations where they are drained, manipulated, or broken. Yet even through the pain, they never lose their softness. Jung believed that the soul grows from conflict, and the empath's early life is filled with it. The conflict of giving even when they have nothing left. The conflict of loving those who cannot love back. The conflict of being the healer who has no healer for themselves. But these conflicts are not punishments. They are initiations. Slowly, something changes inside the empath. A quiet awareness rises, like a flame growing inside a dark room. They begin to notice patterns, how the same kind of people are drawn to them, how the same wounds repeat, how the same emotional parasites return again and again to feed on their compassion. Jung taught that what we do not make conscious will rule our lives, and the empath begins to see that they have been ruled by unconscious patterns of self-sacrifice. They realize that their light, instead of guiding them, has been blinding them to the intentions of others. And with this realization, the empath takes their first step toward the dangerous stage. The transformation is not loud. It does not happen with a dramatic moment of rebellion or revenge. It happens silently, internally. The empath stops making excuses for people. They stop accepting apologies that never change anything. They stop giving chances to those who only take. They stop lowering themselves to raise others who refuse to stand. This is the empath's awakening, and it is terrifying to those who depended on their silence. For the first time, the empath says no. For the first time, they walk away without explaining themselves. For the first time, they choose peace over chaos, self-respect over guilt, and truth over attachment. This is where the danger begins. The empath who reaches this stage becomes different from everyone they once were. They develop emotional intelligence so sharp it cuts through deception instantly. They sense lies not just in words, but in energy. They read intentions the way others read facial expressions. Their sensitivity evolves into discernment. Their compassion becomes wisdom. Their intuition becomes strategy. And their heart, once wide open to everyone, becomes selective, disciplined, powerful. Jung said that the most dangerous thing is a person who has faced their shadow and integrated it. And this is precisely what the evolved empath does. They become the union of gentleness and strength, kindness and boundaries, heart and spine. They no longer fear losing people, because they have already survived losing themselves. They know the taste of emotional betrayal, the weight of carrying others' pain, the emptiness of giving without receiving. When an empath enters the second stage of their awakening, they begin to understand something Carl Jung emphasized throughout his work. Your perception of the world is a mirror of your internal state. For much of their life, the empath projected love, kindness, forgiveness, and healing into the world because that is what lived inside them. But in this stage, they begin to recognize the deeper truth, that the world often projects something very different back at them. They start to see the duality between what they give and what they receive, and this awareness becomes the spark that ignites an even higher level of consciousness. The empath begins to question the nature of their relationships. They examine the people who have surrounded them, not as characters in a story, but as psychological symbols. Jung believed every person in our lives represents a part of our psyche, and the empath begins to see patterns in the people they attract. They see the wounded individuals who sought healing. They see the narcissists who sought admiration. They see the broken souls who sought comfort. And slowly, the empath realizes that they have spent years being the medicine for others while starving emotionally themselves. This insight is not painful, it is liberating. It is the first step toward detaching from the illusions that once held them hostage. In this stage, the empath stops romanticizing suffering. They stop believing that love must hurt, that loyalty must be unconditional, and that kindness requires self-destruction. They begin to understand that not every battle deserves their energy, and not every person deserves access to their heart. Jung wrote that the greatest act of courage is to confront the truths you have been avoiding. And this is precisely what the empath does. They confront the truth that some people never cared. They confront the truth that some relationships were one-sided. They confront the truth that their healing nature attracted people who never intended to grow. This confrontation is not an ending, it is a beginning. The empath begins to rebuild themselves from the inside out. They strengthen their boundaries, not as walls, but as filters. They choose silence when silence is wiser than explanation. They choose distance when distance is healthier than closeness. They choose themselves, not because they are selfish, but because they finally understand that self-preservation is an act of spiritual maturity. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires separation from the people who distort your identity. And the empath begins to embrace this fully. As they evolve, their intuition sharpens even more. They no longer absorb emotions blindly. They interpret them. They no longer get overwhelmed by the world's noise. They analyze it. They no longer respond reactively. They respond intentionally. Their sensitivity becomes a superpower but controlled, focused, disciplined. It is no longer the raw, unprotected feeling of the beginning stage. It is refined emotional intelligence, a kind of inner radar that sees beneath words, beneath behaviors, beneath masks. And it is here in this second stage that the empath becomes quietly untouchable. Their presence gains weight, not through aggression, but through awareness. People sense that they are no longer easy to influence. They are no longer willing to play roles assigned by others. They are no longer willing to shrink themselves to maintain harmony. They radiate an energy that says, without speaking, I see you, I understand you, but you cannot control me anymore. This energy is unsettling to those who once fed on their innocence. But the empath is not concerned with unsettling anyone. They are concerned only with truth, inner truth, psychological truth, spiritual truth. They begin to understand that their purpose was never to carry the emotional responsibilities of the world. Their purpose was to evolve into someone who can see the world. As the empath progresses deeper into this stage, they begin to master one of the most powerful psychological transitions Jung ever spoke about: the shift from unconscious reaction to conscious creation. For years, the empath reacted to the emotions of the people around them. Their energy was shaped by the environment, by the people they tried to help, by the wounds they tried to heal. But now, the empath starts to create their internal world deliberately. Their emotions no longer bend to external chaos. Instead, they become the source of stability within themselves. And this internal stability radiates outward like a quiet force field. They begin to understand that emotional peace is not something given by others. It is something cultivated through discipline, solitude, and radical honesty. They start spending more time alone, not because they feel lonely, but because solitude becomes sacred. In silence, their intuition becomes louder. Their self-understanding becomes sharper. They start hearing their own voice again, the one that was once drowned out by the demands of the world. Jung said that solitude is essential for discovering the true self, and the empath begins to cherish this truth. They withdraw not to escape others, but to return to themselves, and in this return, something extraordinary happens. The empath no longer fears being misunderstood. This is perhaps the most significant turning point. In the past, they tried so hard to explain their intentions, to justify their feelings, to make others understand why they love deeply, why they care so fiercely, why they feel so much. They believed that being misunderstood meant they were failing. But in this evolved state, They recognize that misunderstanding is a natural consequence of having a rare inner world that many people have never experienced. They stop apologizing for their depth. They stop shrinking their sensitivity. They stop diluting their authenticity to fit into shallow spaces. Instead, they embrace the truth that not everyone can understand them, and that this is not a weakness, but a sign of their emotional and spiritual complexity. This shift liberates them from the last chains that once held them down, the need for validation. They no longer seek approval from people who lack emotional depth. They no longer wait for acknowledgement from those incapable of empathy. They no longer measure their worth by how much they can give. Their worth becomes intrinsic, rooted in the inner work they have done, the shadow they have integrated, the wounds they have healed. Jung believed that a person becomes powerful when they stop needing external validation, and the empath now carries this power quietly within them. Their boundaries become stronger but softer. Their presence becomes calmer but firmer. Their voice becomes gentler but clearer. This paradox is what makes them so different from who they once were. They do not raise their voice, yet people listen. They do not demand respect, yet people feel compelled to give it. They do not chase love, yet they attract genuine connection effortlessly. It is not because they have changed who they are. It is because they have finally stopped betraying themselves. But the most profound transformation lies in how they now see others. They no longer judge people solely by their behavior, but by their consciousness. They see wounded souls not as threats, but as reflections of unresolved pain. They see manipulators not as powerful, but as fearful individuals who lack emotional maturity. They see liars not as successful deceivers, but as people who are terrified of their own truth. This level of psychological clarity makes the empath appear almost prophetic. Their insights become precise. Their observations become penetrating. They see beneath the surface of any situation instantly. And this depth of understanding becomes their greatest weapon, a weapon they never use to harm, only to protect. There comes a moment in the empath's journey when everything they have learned, everything they have survived, and everything they have awakened to begins to merge into one powerful inner force. This is the stage where the empath steps fully into their highest consciousness, the stage where they stop existing in the world as a wounded observer and begin moving through it as a self-aware creator. Carl Jung often spoke about individuation, the process of becoming whole, and in this fourth stage, the empath does not merely understand wholeness intellectually. They embody it. They begin to live with a level of emotional clarity that once seemed impossible. Their sensitivity is no longer a burden. It is a finely tuned instrument that guides their decisions. Their intuition is no longer a whisper. It is a voice that speaks with authority. Their boundaries are no longer reactions. They are expressions of self-respect. The empath realizes that their heart was never their weakness, it was their compass, their guide, their inner lighthouse. And now it shines brighter than ever. In this elevated state, the empath no longer absorbs the emotions of others. They interpret them. They no longer carry the wounds of others, they witness them. They no longer fix broken people. They understand them, without losing themselves in the process. This emotional maturity transforms them into someone who can walk into any environment, feel the energy instantly, and remain rooted in their own reality. Jung believed that true power is the ability to stay aligned with one's inner truth while standing in the middle of chaos, and the empath becomes the embodiment of this truth. They begin to move through the world with a calmness that cannot be disturbed. They speak with a gentleness that cannot be manipulated. They love with a depth that cannot be taken advantage of. They walk with a presence that cannot be ignored. People sense this evolution even before the empath says a word. They sense the groundedness. They sense the clarity. They sense the silence that carries strength instead of fear. And to those who once fed on the empath's softness, this transformation is unsettling. For the first time, they see that the empath is no longer a source of endless emotional supply. They are no longer the container for other people's chaos. They no longer give their energy away freely. Instead, they radiate a dignity that says, "I know my worth now, and I protect it." This stage marks the beginning of true emotional sovereignty. The empath stops allowing anyone to determine their value. They stop internalizing the projections of others. They stop letting guilt, obligation, or attachment dictate their choices. Their emotions become self-directed instead of reactive. Their thoughts become intentional instead of habitual. Their actions become aligned instead of scattered. This shift creates a powerful internal harmony, the kind Jung described when he wrote that the greatest battle is between who you are and who the world wants you to be. And in this battle, the empath finally chooses themselves. But this choice is not selfish, it is spiritual. It is not abandonment, it is ascension. It is not rebellion, it is self-realization. With this self-realization, the empath becomes capable of something they could never do before. They can feel deeply without drowning. They can love without losing themselves. They can give without becoming empty. They can observe without absorbing. This is the stage where the empath becomes emotionally bulletproof, not because they are hardened, but because they are whole. Their heart is still open, but now it has a gate. Their mind is still compassionate, but now it has filters. Their soul is still giving, but now it has direction. This is the empath at their most powerful, soft, yet unbreakable, loving yet untouchable, intuitive yet grounded. And this is only the beginning of the fourth stage, the stage where they move beyond survival and step into mastery. And this is where the journey reaches its final truth, the point where the empath who once lived in silence finally steps fully into the power that was always inside them, waiting patiently beneath years of heartache, sacrifice, and misunderstanding. This is the moment when all the pain they carried, all the lessons they learned, and all the battles they fought converge into one undeniable realization. They were never weak. They were simply unguarded. They were never naive. They were compassionate in a world that did not yet know how to value compassion. They were never too emotional. They were tuned into the frequencies of life that others were too disconnected to feel. And now, after walking through every shadow, after surviving every disappointment, after giving pieces of themselves to people who did not know how to hold them, the empath finally breaks through the final threshold of their evolution. They become someone unrecognizable to their past self, someone unshakable, someone deeply aware, someone grounded in their truth. They rise not as the version of themselves shaped by wounds, but as the version shaped by wisdom. They rise with the understanding that love is powerful only when directed inward first. They rise knowing that boundaries are not walls, but gates of protection. They rise knowing that silence is not weakness but strategy. The burden of what happened, they release, not because they were weak, but because they no longer want to be tied to people who never intended to grow. They let go, not because they don't care, but because they finally understand that caring is not an excuse to stay in places that cause suffering. They see the wisdom that was always there beneath the overthinking. They see the inner warrior that was always there beneath the wounds. And this recognition becomes their rebirth. They understand that the world did not break them. It refined them. The betrayal did not ruin them. It revealed them. The loneliness did not punish them. It shaped them. The heartbreak did not destroy them. It awakened them. They now walk with a power that cannot be imitated, a presence that cannot be ignored, a clarity that cannot be manipulated. People feel the difference in them instantly. Some feel inspired by this new energy. Some feel intimidated. Some feel curious. Some feel threatened, but it does not matter, because the empath is no longer living for the approval of others. They are living in alignment with their soul. They have become what Jung described as an integrated being, someone who has embraced both light and shadow, someone who has faced their inner darkness and used it as a foundation for their inner strength. And in this integration lies the true danger, not to the empath, but to anyone who tries to return them to a version of themselves they have outgrown. They no longer chase love, they attract it. They no longer fear endings, they initiate them. They no longer confuse attachment with connection. They understand the difference deeply. And so, this is the end of the journey, but also the beginning of the most powerful chapter of their life. The empath who once struggled to understand themselves has become the empath who understands the world. The empath who once questioned their worth has become the empath who defines it. The empath who once felt too much has become the empath who sees too clearly. They are not hardened, they are awakened. They are not cold, they are conscious. They are not distant, they are selective. They are not dangerous because they hurt others. They are dangerous because they refuse to let anyone hurt them again. This is the final stage. This is the transformation. This is the moment when the empath becomes unstoppable. And as this journey ends, one truth remains. You were never too much. You were simply surrounded by people who were too little. Now you know your power. Now you know your worth. Now you walk forward not as the empath who suffers, but as the empath who rises.